The average age of a public company CEO is now 58 years old. The average director is 63. The average member of Congress is over 60. And the only reason the incoming Senate isn't the oldest ever elected is because so many of its members are dying in power, pulling down the calculation. If Donald Trump serves his entire term, he will be the oldest president in history, after replacing the oldest president in history. We are not alone. The leaders of the two most populous countries in the world, India and China, are also 74 and 71 respectively. The average person living in the world today is on average ruled over by someone 40 years older than them, and it all happened because of a few small demographic changes. So how the f did old people take over the world?
Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's gonna beat President Putin.
They say a wall is medieval. Well, so is a wheel. A wheel is older than a wall.
And a string of...
Utilities being treated fairly. Charlie? Charlie, I'm so used to it.
Just say aye. Okay, just aye.
Up until 2020, baby boomers were the largest generation in America by a significant margin. And as they moved through their lives, they became a significant and highly politically active voting bloc that could almost single-handedly dictate the policies of the government. When they were young, they could vote for free education and strong social support. When they started entering the workforce, they voted for worker protections, affordable housing, and policies to help raise children. When they got a little bit further in their careers, they owned their homes, they wanted lower taxes, good investment returns, and retirement opportunities. The inconvenient side effect was that meant worker protections, free education, and affordable housing became less of a priority for everybody else that came after them. David Willetts, who is currently a member of the British House of Lords, first popularized this idea in his book, The Pinch: How Baby Boomers Took Their Children's Fortune. Willetts is a politician, demographer, and a baby boomer himself, so his book is definitely worth checking out, so I will leave a link to it in the description. But the thing is, the baby boom wasn't enough to get us to where we are today all by itself. Human populations have boomed and bust throughout our entire history. Plagues, wars, famines, and natural disasters have made some generations bigger than others for thousands of years, and never before has so much power been held in the hands of the elderly. In the past, being part of a large generational cohort would actually be a disadvantage because if you had more peers, that means more competition for resources and jobs. So there is something more going on here. Baby boomers and the silent generation were the largest cohort of their time period. But that time period just so happened to be the most intense period of wealth creation in human history. After the Second World War, widespread industrialization, the automation of domestic chores, women entering the workforce, the adoption of global trade, and modern finance made global, and more specifically, American productivity go fucking parabolic. The world is hundreds of times wealthier today than it was in the 1950s, and baby boomers have been able to capitalize on that for their entire lives with their heavy sway on politics. Having policy tailor-made to suit their needs in their specific stage of life during the largest creation of wealth ever allowed baby boomers to amass the largest generational fortune in history. And as they have grown older, that wealth has allowed them to turn that wealth into even more influence. But eventually, that power will be lost, making way for the next generation in line. Even if they won't give up their seats willingly, there is always the inevitability of death to even the playing field, right? Well, it's time to learn how money works to find out why the world is suddenly run by old people, and why it's probably never going to get any better. This week's video is sponsored by Imprint. Imprint is a unique learning app that transforms complex ideas into beautifully visual and interactive lessons, making it easy to learn something new every day. With courses covering a wide range of topics like psychology, philosophy, science, and finance, as well as quick read articles and visual guides, there's something for everyone. One course I'd recommend is Understanding Finance and Investing. It's a great way to grasp the essentials of managing money in the market. Personally, I've been diving into their philosophy courses, and it's been an eye-opening experience. The app's visual and concise lessons make even the most complex ideas clear and engaging, and it's a fun way to feel good about your screen time. Imprint is perfect for anyone who wants to make learning part of their daily routine. Plus, their award-winning app is already trusted by millions of users and has thousands of 5-star reviews. To try everything Imprint has to offer, free for a full 7 days, click on the link in the description. As fans of How Money Works, you will get 20% off Imprint's annual premium subscription. Apple, Microsoft, Google, Sun Microsystems, the Java programming language, and the internet itself all have one thing in common. They are some of the biggest technology companies or systems in the world, sure, but they were all founded, created, or managed by people born in the year 1955. Now, to be fair, Eric Schmidt didn't technically found Google, but he probably had just as big of a role into turning it into what it is today as Larry and Sergey, and he has made billions of dollars in the process. If you want to be president, you should go back a little bit further. 3 of the 5 living presidents were born within 6 months of one another in the year 1946. Now, with such a small sample size and a healthy mix of selection bias, coincidences like this do happen. But people like Malcolm Gladwell have pointed out that this statistical anomaly demonstrates the power of being born in the right time. His book Outliers is one we have referenced on the channel before, and is also definitely worth a read because it provides a lot of insights into how a small bit of luck can cause fundamental differences in outcomes. For boomers, it was a perfect combination of being exposed to new technologies that would go on to change the world and create some of the most valuable businesses in history, and not having that much competition yet. This wasn't just true for founding tech companies and ruling the free world either. Being born in the right place at the right time has helped the oldest people in the world today build up wealth in smaller but arguably more important ways as well. The most obvious factor is housing. Homes in America have never been more unaffordable compared to household incomes, and older generations that have had decades to build up equity in their home, or maybe even some investment properties, are benefiting from this home price appreciation, instead of being crushed by it. Even accounting for the higher interest rates older generations paid on their mortgages, their home ownership rate was much higher than the generations that came after them because the barriers to entry for home ownership were much lower. Today, the gerontocracy is also working to secure that advantage in a slightly less obvious way. According to public records collected by Zippia, the average age of a city council member in America is 52 years old. Now, that's not quite Congress numbers just yet, but remember that city council is often seen as the first step in a political career. So for every 20-something hotshot, there is a real-life Councilman Milton.
Councilman Milton was first elected as a city councilor in 1948 as a member of the Dixiecrat Party. Their platform, deintegrate baseball.
City councils don't pull the levers of global power like Congress does, but your local elected representatives probably have more influence over your life than the big dogs in Washington. In most municipalities across the country, they influence schooling, local amenities, and most importantly, zoning. These people have the power to radically influence home prices in their cities by allowing for higher density housing or by opening up new areas for development, but across the country, they choose not to. Now, even if the people sitting on these councils are spring chickens compared to other areas of government, the people actually engaged with them are not. According to the National Civic League, only 15 to 27% of Americans vote in local elections. And of those who do, elderly homeowners are massively overrepresented. According to the same report, those 65 and above are 7 times more likely to vote in local elections than voters aged 18 to 34. Even local politicians need to listen to their voters. Demographically, based on the people who watch these videos, almost none of you would know who sits on your city council, or even what their policies are, which is a shame because they wield an incredible amount of power. And they are where average people have the best chance at making a real difference. If you have genuinely ever been to a city council meeting or even voted in a local election, comment below and I will take your word for it and bestow you with a useless heart emoji. At least until I get tired and stop reading the comments. Anyway, elderly people have voted for people who will keep their homes valuable, which tends to be more elderly people helping to cement the gerontocracy from the ground floor. So, elderly people were influential at the right time to get rich, and then they use that wealth to buy even more influence. It's a pretty simple cycle, but there is still one thing that doesn't quite add up. There are countries beyond the Great Gulf of America that didn't strike it rich in the second half of the 20th century. Their baby boomers lived tough lives, and even if they were from a country where they could vote, they wouldn't be influencing the economy of a massively wealthy country, shaping it to their will to work for them. They would be voting for the party least likely to take away their basic farm. This is a broad generalization, of course, but it's hard to overstate just how fortunate the USA has been over the last 70 years. There is a graph that is honestly kind of haunting. This is life expectancy at birth for the average global citizen over the last 100 years. There are 2 noticeable dips, one small one which was caused by COVID-19, and this much larger one from 60 years ago. You might think this was from World War II, but those numbers aren't actually captured on this graph because records were too unreliable from back then. This 2-year global dip in life expectancy was caused exclusively by China's Great Leap Forward, an economic plan that was so bad it caused mass starvation and so many casualties it noticeably moved global averages. If American boomers were in the right place at the right time, this was the exact opposite of that. Instead of going on to found a tech company, you would be lucky to make it to your first birthday. The point here is that even still, China is today largely ruled by elderly people. And that's because of the final and most crucial ingredient: inequality. Baby boomers were not only the wealthiest generation in history, they were also the most unequal. Now, before we all go and seize the means of production, it's important to remember that a lot of this inequality was caused by the rich getting richer, even when the poor were getting richer too. The life of a poor boomer was significantly better than the life of a poor person in the 19th century. But the gap between rich and poor grew much more as people built fortunes previously impossible. This means that the world isn't really ruled by boomers. It's ruled by rich boomers. They were just the first group to grab their seats at the table. In China, they just happened to open up conveniently as baby boomers were in key government positions to effectively install their own unique brand of capitalism that unsurprisingly involved making themselves and their close comrades wealthy before anybody else. In fact, even in America, wealth is a big decider of even being around to rule at all. Average life expectancy is way up, and it's continuing to rise, but it's mainly been caused by drops in infant mortality and increases in the lifespan of wealthy people. According to a study published by the National Library of Medicine, the gap in life expectancy between the poorest 1% and the richest 1% was more than 14 years. That's greater than the difference in life expectancy between America and Afghanistan. The study also found that this gap was widening as health technology, diet, and lifestyle advances were resulting in wealthy people living longer, while most of the population was relatively stagnant, especially if they had worked in physical careers. To become an old politician, you first have to become old, and the best way to do that is to stop being poor. The rapid increase in life expectancy has meant that once people get into these positions of power, they are sticking around a lot longer than they normally would have. And if nobody is moving out of these positions, it makes it harder for younger people to move into them. Now, that's most obvious in photos like this, but it's probably an even more serious problem for regular workers around the world who can't move up in the corporate ladder because senior positions are packed with rusted-on executives. Older workers know that it's a lot harder for them to find a new job with a new company, and it's also a lot harder for them to lose their job in the first place. In America, age is a protected class that can't be discriminated against. But only for old people. The law only protects people over the age of 40. Young people are fair game. This has contributed to a trend in the job market where the only way to really increase your position and compensation is to job hop. Because even if companies wanted to reward staff loyalty, most of those benefits would go to the boomers. Now, to be fair, some of these people are extremely competent. A decades-long career will give people a lot of valuable experience, valuable connections, and a valuable reputation. What's more is that the old gripe about old bosses making 3 times your salary while being unable to work their emails is still true in certain circumstances. But even really old people today have been exposed to technology for most of their careers now, so they are not as behind as the elderly people from a decade ago. And none of this should matter anyway, right? Because even if old people do rule the world, eventually we will be those old people, right? Wrong. First off, it's not ideal to have a system where people are just willing to get old enough to finally get some power, and this shift is already happening. The demographic conditions that made this possible in the first place means that as the current rulers die, they are likely to be replaced with much younger candidates. Elderly people have a lot of tools to cling on to power, but as their poorer peers die off, they are losing their demographic might. This hasn't impacted authoritarian states, because once those people gain power, the will of the people isn't going to compel them to give it up. But in 2024, for the first time in decades, democratically elected leaders around the world actually got younger. This was helped by the fact that almost all incumbent leaders did poorly in last year's elections, and opposition leaders are generally younger, but it also marks a trend in younger voters having more influence over who represents them. So, if you are 40-something waiting to inherit the world, the bad news is that, just like the rest of your life, you are probably going to be skipped over. But the good news is that might be a small price to pay to unseat the gerontocracy. The exception to this global trend was here in America. Now, there is one place where power has been accumulated in the hands of the elderly faster than ever. It's on corporate boards for well-connected people with friends in right places. It's the ultimate retirement gig. So go and watch this video to find out what the f these people actually do. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.